Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and this is another edition of Just Thinking. So we have a primary election coming up on September 6th. That would be the day after Labor Day. I'll say that more than once tonight because I want you to remember that. Right now, we're worrying about the 8th Middlesex district, which is our state representative district. Carolyn Dykema resigned or retired this year actually, and she's not running. So now we have two candidates in the Democratic primary, and there is no contest in the Republican primary. So in the Democratic primary, we have Connor Degan, who is here with me today, and I'm going to run through a series of questions with him. Another day, I will tape his opponent, and I will run through the same series of questions with him. Okay? So let's jump in, and I'm going to ask you right from the start. Hi, welcome. Start with that.
Thank you very much for having me, Mary.
Thank you. Why don't you just take a couple of minutes and just tell us who you are and why you're running?
Absolutely. So I'm Connor Degan. I am a lifelong resident of Hopkinton. I'm currently the elected town clerk in Hopkinton, where I had the chance to expand the role into being more and more of a citizen advocacy role and trying to help people who were trying to navigate the intricacies of municipal government and can't figure out why it wouldn't work for them, and to try to help them figure that out and to advocate for them as well with trying to deal with other communities that I had contacts in, and to help really make government easier for people, make it work for them. I've always found that the idea of representative government is a really great ideal, but it's only a great ideal if people follow it. And I've always been passionate about it and interested in policy and trying to find ways that things can be done better, even if it's just in a philosophical debate. So I'd love to have a chance to try and make things a little bit better, even if it's just mildly, throughout the Commonwealth and our district and right here in our communities, and make sure that people feel as represented as they did while Carolyn was in the seat as well.
Okay, big shoes to fill. We'll say that, but you don't have to wear heels, I guess, so that's good. So, Massachusetts is pretty much in effect a Democratic state. The legislature is anyway. It's pretty much in the strong, control of the Democrats. So among the Democrats, there are, and this is a good thing, I think, there are progressives, liberals, moderates, and conservatives. Where would you put yourself on that spectrum? And demonstrate that. How would you demonstrate that that's the case?
So for me, I would say I'm probably in the liberal category. And I think I have some policies that I like that are progressive, but ultimately I think the reason I would classify myself as liberal is that I also believe that part of the government's role is to help build that access towards making sure that capitalist economies and everything around us works. I don't want to see the damage that can be done to small town businesses. I'd love to see, in effect, us supporting people in with the economy so that they can be better able to frequent and support smaller local businesses as well, and not have to go to whatever can give them the cheapest price. And being able to ensure fair and equal wages and ensuring that we can give those opportunities and that access to people is really something that I believe will help to let people have that choice. I've spoken to people who they really believe that they wish they could afford to go to the farmer's market and everything else like that, and they can't because they're on a teacher's salary and they don't actually make enough to be able to go to do that. And I want to be able to see that people who are really dedicating that much of their life to making our society better have the opportunity to work towards supporting their businesses and their community as well.
Okay. All of your work will be divided by committees. Do you have favorite choices that you'd like for yourself? What would you like to be appointed to?
Well, as a passion point for me, I am fascinated based on my own experience with election law. So I'd love to be on the Joint Committee for Election Law. It's one that I've always been interested in. I've testified to them before. So that's one that I'd be interested in. But I also think that committees that our district would be well served by me having some sort of seat on, or at least working with the reps who are in those, are going to be ones around like the Joint Committee on Climate Change and the Environment, the Joint Committee on substance use and mental health, And as well as for me, I find the aspect of the House Committee on Ethics to be an interesting one as well.
Yeah, that would be interesting to me too. Is there anything you'd like to accomplish in your first 2 years that would benefit the district as a whole? And it isn't just legislation, because you may not control that, but it could be some other activity or whatever.
Yeah. So one that I'd love to see that COVID kind of snuffed out was the torch that continued to pass on of the senior picnic that we've had in our district.
Oh.
I think especially after so long of people being cooped up and alone,
Yeah.
having a chance to come together and break bread across all sorts of ideologies and just have that time to really connect communities is something that we really need again.
You went to those? Did you?
I did. I
Yeah,
always
they were
went to
fun?
those. They were always a
fun.
blast.
Yeah, I know. It can be. Okay, so this one is about you. What is it that you offer this district that is unique to you and that you feel will benefit the 8th Middlesex district?
I think that I offer a fresh perspective on things. I've dedicated my early career to public service in the municipal level and learned the ropes on that so that I can learn how laws affect our municipalities and how we can best change those laws so that they have less of an impact, especially on our communities, which can sometimes be forgotten in the legislative process. And we see that with laws like the recent law on police reform that the goal was pure, and it was trying to make sure that police officers had the proper amount of training. But it effectively destroyed the auxiliary departments for so many different police departments across the Commonwealth, especially smaller towns that rely heavily on them. And that's an example of where I think having that perspective that comes from smaller towns and working with surrounding reps can be really beneficial.
Hopkinton has one, an auxiliary?
Hopkinton has it was special police officers that the name changed, but they're ultimately still the same.
Yeah.
And they still fall under similar requirements for training.
Yeah.
So unless they're a retired officer that's gone through all of that training in the academy, then there's still no luck.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. So now with one of the changes here, this district now, we've picked up a couple of precincts in Millis. And, which is really unfortunate, I think, because you now share a community with another rep, and they have to rely, they meaning the voters, have to rely on the fact that you two are going to do as much as you can to coordinate your efforts. So how do you think you can do that, you and the colleague that you're going to share with for the town of Millis?
Well, and that's an open seat too, so who knows who it's going to be at this point. But I think that ultimately any legislation that I push, anything that I push for any of the constituents that I have in Millis, even though only 2/3 of them vote for me, the hope is that all of them benefit from that legislation. All of them benefit from the advocacy that I can help provide. It's not a case that I'm looking at it from where, oh, because of your address, I'm not going to talk with you. Your concerns don't bother me at all, because ultimately what's good for one part of the community benefits or has some interaction or domino effect with all of them. And it is unfortunate, but I think that one of the things I've learned even just along the campaign trail has been interacting with and building relationships with surrounding state reps. In the same way that certain pieces of advocacy or legislation can impact everyone across a town, you can also have plenty of legislation that ends up impacting multiple communities. And I think working with other representatives is part of the job.
Okay. So here's a biggie. Public education. Your thoughts and feelings, please describe your thoughts and feelings about K through 12 and whether or not you think the local districts are doing all that they can, and is the state supporting them appropriately?
Well, I'll start by saying I am a massive advocate for public education. I am the product of it. I went K through 12 in Hopkinton's public schools. I was very fortunate to be able to be in a very strong public school system, but there are still issues that they've faced with growth. There's issues that a lot of us have continued to face around growth and around aging utilities and facilities. I think it's not a failure of our districts. It's a need for more assistance from the state. We have all of these rules that we need to follow when it comes to ensuring that our students receive the best education they can. I think the state needs to really ensure that we have educators and school committee and board members there with a seat at the table so that they can truly be part of that process. And even if that's just a part of making sure that I make that time to sit down and meet with those folks, and that's something I've talked about with educators at this point, of sitting down and talking with teachers about what things they need to see as reform possibilities in their schools.
Is there one that you could share as an example?
So I think one that I saw pretty significantly was the state wasn't really consulting, especially the Department of Public Health, which had a lot on its hands in the last few years, but it would pass down along with DESE to say, this is going to be the new rule in the school districts for how we're going to deal with COVID. And they would pass it down, and it would be taking in effect within 24 hours, and everyone would have to scramble to change how everything worked, and it might not even actually work with that school district. And I saw teachers, parents, and students struggling because of it. And they, to this day, many of them feel like their voices weren't heard when it came to public education. And for the most part, the school committees and the educators and the administration's hands were tied. They could really only do in that case what the state told them they could do.
It was a unique set of circumstances, but, and we hope it doesn't happen again. But I hear what you're saying is that perhaps anything that affects the community's school programs really needs enough time to have a little bit more feedback and gestation time, if you will. So anyway, we're going to move on with just some quick and dirty answers, if you will. Probably
Sure.
not dirty, but How do you feel about charter schools?
So I think that with charter schools, they unfortunately take some resources away from our own public education systems, which we can bolster. And in charter schools, we really don't have the capability of having any oversight or accountability beyond the results that they provide.
Right.
And so really all we have is the standardized testing results to say whether or not they met those. But it doesn't mean that all of the other things that are really important to education and the things that we get out of publicly funded education, some of those can be glossed over. And I think it's important to have some degree of voter accountability in general as well, and how that is done. That's why we elect school committees. That's why people serve on them. That's why people go and talk to them.
Okay. How about prayer in school?
I think that in a private institution, that's one thing. If you're going to a religious or institution for school, then yeah, go for it. That's your choice. Religion and faith is voluntary. But in public schools, I don't think it belongs there. It's supposed to be secular, and the only thing that we should be doing with religion in public schools is looking at it through an academic lens.
Okay. Separation of church and state.
Similar piece there. I'm a person of faith myself, but I believe that in government, it's important that government be secular, not atheist, but just ensure that it doesn't infringe on anyone when their beliefs come into play, but also doesn't favor one over another at any point.
Okay. Banning of books.
I think banning of books is a dangerous practice. Banning of speech is always a slippery slope. It all depends on who's in charge of banning the books at that given time.
Yeah.
Because right now it could be that we're talking about banning some books that are far right, like propaganda, but could be that shifts in power happen, and all of a sudden we're banning books on sexual education, Harry Potter, because of witchcraft. And so I think it's better to make sure that we just look at things through an educational lens rather than just straight out ban them.
Okay. Abortion.
I believe that it's a person's right to bodily autonomy. I think it's a choice between an individual and their doctor, and I don't think it should be a political issue.
Okay. Climate change.
Climate change is real. Climate change is a problem. I just came in from outside. I'm still wet from the heat.
Yeah.
And I think that we have the capability right now. We're at the precipice where we can do a lot to make it better, or at least to stall it. And I think that we owe that to future generations to do that. We learned from the mistakes of the past, and now we have a chance to not only positively impact the issue, but also bring it in with economic development as well, and create new energy industries and really put forward new jobs as we do so as well.
Okay. Parental rights in their children's education.
I think that parental rights are important in a child's education. I think that one thing that always is important to remember is we have one of the benefits of public education is you have the ability to go and say, I want to talk to my elected officials, or I want to run for an office that's going to have an effect on curriculum, on who's in charge of what. But I think it's also important that we don't micromanage teachers in our school systems. They are our local experts on education. And we need to set the overall policy and curriculum, but we need to remember that there's a reason that we're teaching things that we are. It's not to be something that's offensive, and if it is something that's being done the wrong way, then that's why we have elected representatives who can step in and stop that kind of mistreatment.
Okay. So, diversity. It's a complex issue, and it can cover so many different things. When we say it, we often think of race, but, as an older person, I can tell you it can also be age, it can be education, it can be gender, it can be, so many different things. So, as a state representative, how specifically can you help with that in this district, and what can you do to help folks here understand, about the issues that are underneath it all?
So, for me, I've seen diversity in all sorts of aspects as well. We have seen in Massachusetts as a whole, race-wise and ethnicity-wise, we've had the fastest growing population of Asians and Pacific Islanders across the whole country. And we have a lot of these folks that are coming in, and they're bringing customs that are really enlightening to us in some ways. I have found great joy in being able to join in a lot of those cultural interactions. And at the same time, I've seen it when it comes to age on both sides of it. I've seen people who are discriminatory based on someone being too old. I've experienced people discriminating against me because I'm too young. When I first ran for town clerk, I was told by a few people, yeah, I like you, but you're too young to be making that kind of money.
The money in town office?
Right?
Okay, I'm sorry. All right.
So I think that it's important as somebody who, in a state representative role, crosses all of these districts and crosses the towns and the communities within them. It puts you in a unique position to bring people together and find ways to have projects work across those borders.
Okay. So, is there any issue that you can think of that would be best served if all the communities in the district got together under one umbrella and tried to address it? What would that issue be, and why that issue?
I think specifically when it comes to mental health and substance use, I think that multiple communities coming together can really help. One example I used when talking with someone else earlier this week was we have mutual aid agreements between our emergency personnel and neighboring towns, and that benefits us significantly, and it ensures that even if we're short on a resource, that we're able to ensure that the public gets what they need. I think that's one where if we have smaller communities that might not be able to afford to have a full-time person that they can dedicate to certain social services, that having some kind of agreement with a larger community neighboring can help to have crisis response that is, assists our police officers when it comes to potentially nonviolent issues or just crisis moments where someone is contemplating suicidal thoughts or even potentially overdosing. We run the risk of failing a whole lot of people right now if we don't address the mental health issues that affect all of us. We've seen it even more exacerbated by COVID, but it was there, and now it's just been made worse. And I think we're seeing it with our youth, but we're seeing it with seniors who've been trapped home alone. We're seeing it with people who faced job loss and economic crises all across the district and our communities. We're seeing it with our friends, we're seeing it with our neighbors, and I just think it's something that we really need to address.
Okay. What happens when a situation arises in which the needs of one community might be different from and maybe even in conflict with the needs of another district or another community in your district? How will you make the decision? Not, I'm really talking about process here. What kind of thinking do you have to go through in terms of making a decision about how you're going to land on something?
So I feel like the first thing that I try to do, and this is just how I approach problem solving in general, is I see an issue and I look at change as inevitable. You're always going to see things moving forward, but if you become one of the voices involved in it, you're able to help direct it the right way. My first attempts would be around making sure that I can first minimize that negative impact, whether it be by trying to propose amendments or find ways that we can create some out for a community that might be harmed by it. The next thing, if that fails, is I need to speak with constituents about how I'm going to make that decision. I need to talk with people because I'm, at the end of the day, a representative. I'm not just some lone person sitting in a room by myself. I'm part of the community and I am entitled as well, representing the community. And that's really what I need to do. And yes, sometimes those decisions are going to be hard. And I'm going to have to possibly make decisions that will potentially negatively impact someone in the community. And I think really trying to analyze how those impacts can be softened is the way that I would go about trying to deal with those in advance.
Okay. Do you have bills, legislation that you'd like to file? And please tell us about those and why they're of interest.
So I have...
How many?
I won't go through a whole list. I'll tell one that I see it a lot and not a lot of people do because I see it a lot on the clerk side.
Sure.
So there's a law in the books that makes it so that if a child is born and they have either their parents aren't married or one parent is unknown, then their record is what we call impounded. And most people have no knowledge of it because for the longest time, those have been non-issues. It was designed to try and protect people from the stigma of your parents not being married. And what it's done in effect is it's disproportionately affected people who are of lower socioeconomic classes. I see it affecting single parents, and I have grandparents that are trying to help take care of their grandchildren while their child is working to support their children and their family. And I see these grandparents come in, say, like, my son is working or my daughter is working. I really need to get this birth certificate so that I can help them with this process that they need to get done with the courts. And based on the law, because they are not the guardian, I can't even tell them that that record exists. I am not legally allowed to give them the record. I have to have a parent or the child themselves when they're old enough, or a legal guardian who has all the paperwork to prove it, or someone with a court order. And then I'm forced to tell these people who are really trying to help get their kids and their grandchildren moving forward that I can't help you unless you tell your extremely busy child to take the time off and lose money to support their own children, to come in person, show their ID and proof that they have everything that they need to be able to get this record.
What happens if that single parent dies?
Then it goes to whoever is the court-appointed guardian, or whoever was so if the grandparents get it, if it goes to an aunt or an uncle, then they get the authority to do that and to get that, but they have to then make sure they have all the paperwork, and they still have to show up in person.
Yeah.
Or they have to have all these notarized documents that they need to send in to show that they are actually the person who is allowed to get these records.
That must wreak havoc if you're doing ancestry work.
It does.
Yeah, I can bet it does.
And it's just it's really, for me, sad to see when I deal with it firsthand with people who need it. And it's not something that I've only seen once or twice. This is something that I've seen dozens of times, and it's just unfortunate that we can't do more to help these people. And I know there's been some effort to try in the past, and it hasn't made much traction.
Well, those are sort of boring issues, you
Yes,
know.
right.
But, yeah, but they're important issues if they're affecting you, you know. Okay, have you ever attended a legislative session in the chamber as an onlooker? And describe your thoughts and feelings about that place.
So, I have not attended a session of the legislature in the chamber. However, I had the great honor of, back in 2018, being invited by our Senate president to attend the Citizens Legislative Seminar. And I got to see the process go through from the very start and birth of a bill to committee to be playing legislator for a day while debating on the Senate floor.
Fun stuff.
Yes.
If you're a political wonk, you know, it's fun stuff.
And for better or worse, I am.
Yeah, so am I. It's also a pretty impressive. It's a pretty impressive place. So, have you ever testified before a legislative committee? You referred earlier to the fact that you had. When? Why? What was the subject matter?
In 2019, it comes back to my belief in that change is inevitable, but we can get on board and try to make it better. And I saw an opportunity around that with ranked choice voting.
Okay.
I saw that there were potential blind spots in it because there weren't a whole lot of people who were election officials who were involved in the process and could see how it was going to be implemented on the ground. So I wanted to testify in favor of the concept, but ensure that the execution was being done the correct way, and making sure that they're aware of how it's going to affect smaller communities that have hand count systems still, as well as how we're going to make sure that the state knows this is not going to be a free concept. It's going to require resources from the state. We have to make sure that we don't just throw it on all these towns, that they need to buy all this extra equipment and upgrade all these contracts without any assistance. Looking at all the unfunded mandates I see anyway, it's something that we need to see more in the planning process. But that's something that I was testifying on. I went in and joined. I was an onlooker for a while on it first, because the order of precedence is you let the senators speak first, and then you let the House members that are there speak, and then they'll start recognizing certain other people. But typically, the people who are invited guests first. Yeah. So, but it was an experience, and I had a lot of fun doing it as well.
Yeah, it's good prep too. So what do you think are the top two issues that you face, or this whole district faces, that cut across our boundaries and affect all of us, whether we live here or in Millis or in Hopkinton, here being Holliston?
Yep.
And why those two, and what are your solutions?
Well, I think one I mentioned earlier, being around mental health, I think that's something that does have an impact on all of us. I think that it's important that we address it, and it's important we address it not only just as a district and as multiple communities, but it's something that affects all of the people across the Commonwealth. So it's something that we should be working with neighboring legislators as well to really work on getting that done. And then the next piece being, I think we've seen it here in Holliston, I've seen it over in Hopkinton, and while talking in the other towns as well, issues around water right now and water contamination. And unfortunately, right now, the towns are being left to mitigate a lot of it. I know there's some proposals to have the state do some extra work on it too. But I think that what we really need to be looking at is it's not the state or the towns that were responsible for putting these into the systems, and we shouldn't be forcing taxpayers to bear the brunt of it either. We should be looking at where there was things that are being used in the system. PFAS is a great example, where they're being used in manufacturing, they're still being used in manufacturing. We actually get more PFAS from eating a brand I won't name's cupcake from the wrapper that it's in than we do from drinking the water that might have contaminated levels for a week. And I think finding ways to have that mitigation funded by those who introduced it into the system, and then also banning its use in commercial and manufacturing products. There was a huge win on that when it came to removing PFAS from firefighters' uniforms that was just done in this last session. And that was a huge win to prevent cancer for our firefighters across all of our communities. And it's something that we can, I give credit to the legislature, they get to put a feather in their cap for that one. But we need to be looking at that across multiple industries too.
Okay, so Connor, you now have your 2 minutes to go ahead and give your pitch to why people should vote for you.
Thank you. So I'm really hopeful that I can earn your vote on September 6th. I don't take any of it for granted, any of the support that I have, and I really want it to be truly representative for you. I want to take my passion for government and government that works well as my advocacy, my passion around and experience around municipal government and how it works, as well as the passion I have for civic engagement and trying to ensure that voices are heard in government. I really hope that you'll make a choice on how you're going to vote this season. There's so many choices on how to vote, and so I think it's vital that you make a plan, whether you're going to be voting by mail and you've already voted, or you're going to be voting in person early or on election day. Make a plan on how you're going to do so, and I just hope that you'll consider me and my experience and my passion, my perspective, as I look forward to being your representative. Thank you very much, and I humbly ask for your vote on September 6th or before.
Terrific. Okay, folks, thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.